York police officer named Jonathan Diller was fatally shot during a somewhat of a traffic stop, although the car wasn't moving, in Queens on Monday evening. And as we've seen with many other violent incidents as of late, the people involved in the shooting both had multiple prior arrests, including one for attempted murder. The 31-year-old officer joined the police force in February of 2021 and tragically leaves behind a wife and a son under the age of 1. The police said the episode had begun shortly before 6 p.m. on Monday when Officer Diller and his partner from the police department's community response team approached the car because it was illegally parked at a bus stop on Mott Avenue. Investigators currently believe that the suspects were parked illegally while casing a T-Mobile store when Diller and another cop asked them to move. Their vehicle again was illegally parked in a bus area. Here's more on the crime.
An NYPD source identified the shooter as 34-year-old Guy Rivera and the driver of the vehicle as 41-year-old Lindy Jones. The NYPD says Rivera shot Officer Diller after the two men refused numerous requests to get out of the car.
So, I mean, it just escalated immediately. He refused to get out of the car. Officer Diller, he refused to move the car. At that point, Officer Diller asks him to get out of the car. And that's when things devolved. The suspected gunman, Guy Rivera, who's 34 years old, who was sitting in the passenger seat, was also wounded, the police said. He was the first to fire his gun during the evening encounter in Far Rockaway, striking the officer, Jonathan Diller, in the torso below his protective vest. The officer's partner returned fire, striking the man, who was also taken to Jamaica Hospital where he is being treated for his injuries. The driver, Lindy Jones, 41, was taken into police custody. Police said Wednesday that the gun Rivera used was found to have jammed after it fired a single shot that killed the officer. Prosecutors obtained a search warrant for the SUV the men were driving, which is when a second gun was found with the serial number filed off, meaning they were in possession of a ghost gun. Here's more on the men behind the tragic shooting.
Sources tell us both suspects have long criminal records. Rivera, the shooter, has at least 4 prior arrests, including for armed robbery and drug dealing. Jones has at least a dozen arrests, including as recently as April 2023 for a loaded firearm. New York City Mayor Eric Adams had this to say.
This is what you call not a crime problem, a recidivist problem. Same bad people doing bad things to good people. Less than a year, he's back on the streets with another gun.
Look, I want to be clear about something. I think people who have been arrested multiple times for violent crimes should be behind bars. However, you're gonna keep seeing recidivists unless we reform our prisons so they actually rehabilitate people. We don't have that right now. So it's not shocking to me that violent criminals are let out and then they commit more violent crimes. That's gonna continue happening unless we have a serious conversation about investing in our prison system, investing in policing to improve and reform the failures that we're experiencing right now. But the idea that we should just let violent criminals out wandering the streets and committing more violent crimes is ridiculous. The crimes they've committed weren't petty theft or something negligible. Many of them were violent offenses. Records show Rivera has been arrested by the NYPD 21 times, 9 of them felonies. He was released from prison in September of 2021 after serving nearly 5 years for first-degree robbery and criminal sale of controlled substance. He was paroled in 2021, but prior to that, Rivera spent 3 years in state prison for a 2011 assault and was released in October of 2014. Rivera's mother, Keshia Gilliard, told the New York Daily News that he did not trust law enforcement after serving time in prison. In addition, she told the press that, quote, he might have thought they were trying to hurt him and something snapped. He's still in the hospital and has not yet been formally charged for his role in the shooting. But meanwhile, Jones has 14 prior arrests. He was arrested for second-degree criminal possession of a weapon for having a loaded firearm in Far Rockaway on April 17th, 2023. He was out on $75,000 bail. He previously served 10 years in prison on 2003 attempted murder and robbery charges and was released in November of 2013. After the shooting, he was arraigned in Queens on 4 illegal weapons charges. Luckily, this time he's being held in custody. A local ABC News affiliate notes that prosecutors highlighted his violent history and missing court dates in arguing for holding him without bail. Judge Maria Gonzalez luckily agreed that he poses a flight risk and remanded Jones. And now Donald Trump is taking advantage of this by making, in my opinion, a smart political move. He attended the slain officer's wake today in New York. His campaign spokeswoman said, quote, President Trump is moved by the invitation to join NYPD officer Jonathan Diller's family and colleagues as they deal with his senseless and tragic death. Look, I'm gonna be real, that's probably gonna play well with voters, especially since the majority of Americans are in fact concerned about crime, whether people like it or not. A November Gallup poll found that 63% of Americans describe the crime problem in the United States as either extremely or very serious, up from 54% when last measured in 2021 and the highest in Gallup's trend. Now, all this isn't to say that NYPD officers are getting gunned down left and right. That is not happening. Diller is actually the first NYPD officer to be killed in the line of duty since 2022. But it's an example of violent criminals reoffending after being let back out into society soon after their previous offenses. Unfortunately, there's yet another example coming out of New York this week.
A man tonight charged there with murder for what police say was an unprovoked attack on the subway, a horrific attack. The suspect in custody there after that arrest. But the scary scene inside a subway station in Harlem, police all around, happened during rush hour, right as we were coming off the air last night. The victim was pushed onto the tracks, was pronounced dead on the scene. The suspect reportedly has a history of arrests and mental illness, according to the New York Times.
How many times is this gonna happen in New York? This isn't the first time this has happened. Okay, NYPD says officers arrived to find 53-year-old Jason Voles had been shoved onto on the number 4 train tracks. An oncoming train was not able to stop and he was pronounced dead at the scene. 24-year-old Carlton McPherson was arrested and charged with murder. Officials say that he has multiple prior arrests and has a long and violent past. The NYPD has responded to incidents where McPherson was acting erratically, and authorities say he has a history of mental illness. McPherson had been hospitalized at least half a dozen times since last year for mental health treatment, according to someone who has seen some of his medical records. A neighbor in the Bronx said he sometimes slept in a hallway closet in his grandmother's building because she would not let him into her apartment. The Times reports that last October, a man whom prosecutors believe to be McPherson, because he had the same name and birth year, was charged with beating a Brooklyn homeless shelter employee with a cane. He was released without bail after he was arraigned on an October 31st arrest for assault, menacing, harassment, and other charges in Brooklyn. He failed to show up for court twice, and a judge issued a warrant for his arrest. He was picked up and brought to court on January 11th, where bail was set for $2,000, which he posted. His next court date was set for July, and then he committed the crime that he just committed. Jason Voles, the man he pushed in front of the subway, was recovering from addiction and had also endured homelessness himself, but had recently gotten sober. 2 years ago, he actually got sober and had just moved into a new apartment, according to his ex-wife. Since McPherson faces a murder charge, there's no chance that he'll be released, at least not anytime soon. But considering he allegedly suffered from severe mental illness, it should be shocking that he wasn't involuntarily committed into a long-term mental health facility. Groups like the ACLU fight against policies that would involuntarily commit people with severe mental illnesses, claiming it's a violation of their civil liberties. But exactly how humane is it to neglect people who are a harm to themselves or to others? How does it make sense to wait until someone suffering from mental illness commits a crime so horrific that they'll end up with a lifelong prison sentence? We're just setting people up to fail or to get hurt. In response to the subway incident, Mayor Eric Adams said that recidivism is a real issue and that The second issue we have in the city is a severe mental health illness problem that was played out at 125th Street and Lexington Avenue at the subway station. And he was a recidivist, several severe mental health issues, indicators of violence. When you do an analysis and a cross correlation, you will see it's the same people over and over again. Look, unfortunately, Adams is right about recidivists causing most of the chaos in New York. In fact, criminal justice reformers at John Jay College have research to back this up. They looked into the impact of bail reform, something they favor, and found that there's a specific group of individuals who enjoy bail reform only to go out and commit more crimes. They write that the elimination of money bail increased recidivism for people charged with non-violent felonies, with recent criminal history, and with a recent violent felony arrest, while it decreased recidivism for people charged with misdemeanors and people with no recent criminal history. The reduced use of bail for legally eligible cases tended to increase recidivism among people charged with violent felonies and people with a recent arrest. The starkest and most consistent recidivism increases across both research designs were among people with a recent prior felony arrest and among people currently charged with violent felonies who had a recent criminal history. So just to get even more granular on this, 67% of defendants who had a recent prior violent felony arrest in the past year who were released under bail reform were rearrested within 2 years of their arraignment. Almost half, 49%, were rearrested for a felony. We're seeing a lot of this play out in New York's subway system. The NYPD chief of transit says arrests made so far this year in the subway system more than double the number from this time last year. NYPD numbers show that the total reports of murder, rape, robbery, felony arrest, burglary, grand larceny are up 4.4% compared to this time last year. So for those who want to keep bail reform, I suggest we tweak it to fix the flaws that allow for violent offenders to offend again and again and again. Like the guy who viciously and randomly attacked 57-year-old Dulce Pichado as she was walking along a sidewalk in Brooklyn. So Pichado was violently punched in the face and had to have her jaw wired shut as a result. She lost 3 teeth, is suffering from permanent damage to her lower lip, and her face is fractured in several places. She likely needs to undergo surgery as a result of this attack. Unfortunately, fortunately, the suspect, who ABC News says has 7 prior arrests for assault, was arrested. Unfortunately, he was detained in New York. Officers arrested 33-year-old Franz Judy. He was charged with misdemeanor assault, meaning he's not bail eligible. He will be released back onto the street. How exactly is punching a woman so hard that her jaw needs to be wired shut a misdemeanor? Can someone please explain that to me? Why did the prosecutors charge this guy with a misdemeanor? Look, I keep hearing from criminal justice reformers over and over again that all these stories that we're covering, about the flaws in the, reformed bail system, they're just myths. We're just fear mongering. That's all we're doing. It's all fear mongering. But none of them ever take the time to address these very real cases, including a case that I covered last week involving 4 people who were found to have dismembered body parts in their apartment. They were booked and released immediately because apparently dismembering a body and then hiding evidence is not considered bail eligible under bail reform in New York. How does that make any sense? And some people push back and say, Anna, you're pushing a false narrative. The left doesn't like this, the left doesn't want this. Then why doesn't the left speak out against it? The only time I hear the left speak out is when they speak out against me drawing attention to the flaws in the reformed bail system. So if you believe that this isn't a reality that the left is endorsing or supporting, then speak up. Push back against it instead of pushing back against me for sharing the details of what's happening on the ground in places like New York. And for the love of God, if you're going to provide cover for what's going on by sharing national crime statistics, which are incomplete because There are police departments around the country that are not cooperating with the FBI or sharing their data with the FBI. Just know that most people who are following crime in the country know that it's not a national issue. It is an issue in very specific cities like New York, like San Francisco, like Los Angeles. You look at those statistics and then you wanna argue that it isn't a problem. Some of the most populous places in this country are definitely experiencing this problem. And rather than seeking justice for everyone involved, seeking rehabilitation for the perpetrators of these crimes, I feel like we're just supporting weird, libertarian policies where we just don't allow for the government to step in to keep the general public safe. Just not in favor of that. I don't think that's the right approach. And I think this is the kind of stuff that's gonna lead to the pendulum swinging right back to tough on crime policies. If you don't want that, then we should fix the flaws when we see them in the reforms that have been made. Unfortunately, we're in an era of politics where it's all or nothing. Even if you see the flaws, you gotta support it because your tribe likes these policies or purports to support these policies. I disagree. I think that you can be in favor of bail reform while acknowledging the flaws in how it's been implemented. You can fix those flaws and have a better outcome. It's just that we're not having a conversation about that at all.